Hello and welcome back to Change Wallaert podcast. Guys, imagine your company spends millions designing customer journeys, products, services, testing, nudging, optimizing. Yet inside your own walls, on your team, your people systems run mostly on autopilot or chance. Why do we obsess over shaping customer behavior so much but leave employee behavior almost to chance? The very behavior that shapes everything else, including customer behavior and how successful the products and services get. Welcome to Change Wallaert podcast. I'm your host, Angela Shurina, your coach 360, your partner in change, transformation, and behavioral change that sticks, lasts, and creates positive difference. Today is a special episode. We are having again Matt Wallaert, one of the world's leading voices in applied behavioral science, and I would argue one of the most active and passionate voices. Matt is a head of customer experience at Oceans. Oceans is on a mission to streamline your company's operations by connecting you with experienced executive assistants worldwide and beyond. Matt also is an author of one of my favorite books on applied behavioral science, Start at the End, How to Build Products That Create Change. Matt is also a TED speaker and advisor to global organizations who want to use science to design better human systems. This is, as I mentioned, Matt's second round on Change Wallaert. In our first conversation, we explored what it really takes to apply behavioral science in the real world. The myth, the models, and the mindsets required to make evidence-based change stick and last. In this episode, we go deeper on the cultural side of things. Matt and I talk about the forgotten frontier of behavioral science, internal change, how and why organizations can design systems where people don't just perform, but grow, and because of that, deliver the best possible results for the company. You'll hear Matt's surprisingly simple yet profound framework, which talks about why growth, meaning, and money form three pillars of motivation at work, and why most companies only focus on one and where it gets them. How to decouple growth from unevenly distributed opportunity so advancements at work no longer depend on politics or luck. The single easiest tool to start changing your company's culture tomorrow, and it's not software or AI. And why making it easier to grow does not mean lowering standards. It means redesigning the systems to support people's potential. My challenge is how we think about development, fairness, and leadership accountability at work. And he does it with clarity and humility of someone who's actually building the systems he talks about. So if you are a leader, a founder, or a culture builder, or some sort of change agent who wants your people to grow, or people to grow, period, faster than AI and other technological tools, this episode will change how you see things, how you think about things, and hopefully what you do with this knowledge. So let's dive in. Out of the darkness, so to speak. And it's funny, you're flying from Siberia to South Africa and you're dressing up, not the other way around.
I think people's stereotypical notion of places is often wrong. I'm from Oregon in the US, which everyone's stereotypical association is rain, and they're right, it's rainy. So I do have that, I am fulfilling all the stereotypes.
Yes, well, for today, you never know. Maybe. Yeah, let's just jump into our conversation. Maybe let's start light. What's new, exciting in the world of behavioral science since we last spoke a few
In
weeks
the
back?
last week, what is new exciting in the world of behavioral science since a week ago? I don't know that anything is new and exciting in the world of behavioral science. I was giving a talk in Chicago on behavioral science at a conference. And so there are a couple of big cities in the United States where you see a lot of behavioral scientists for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
New York, because of business, Chicago, because of the University of Chicago, where a lot of, behavioral economics was sort of born and fermented. San Francisco, obviously, because of startup culture, and then San
Hmm.
Diego, primarily because of health related stuff. So
Okay.
there's a lot of health and pharma companies down here. So those are the sort of four biggest hubs where you see a ton of behavioral science in the United States. So I was in Chicago, and so we did a little get together of applied behavioral scientists. And there were 8 or 10 of us, and it was fun. Over the course of a couple hours, we had lots of tacos and margaritas and things. And I think what you find is the importance of community. Behavioral
Hmm.
scientists, by and large, face many of the same challenges in organizations, right? Building a team, helping people understand how they bring value, when to bring them in, when not to bring them in, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that there is like a generalized need for community in behavioral science. It's interesting. One of the things that's happened for many years is people sort of complain that in the US, at least, we don't really have a conference or anything for behavioral
Hmm.
scientists. There's some gatherings in the UK, but in the US, we don't really have a conference or anything. And what I've always insisted is I don't know that we actually need a conference, meaning I don't think the problem is Angela needs Matt to like stand on stage and give a talk about behavioral science stuff, in that
Hmm.
the majority of experienced behavioral scientists kind of know the problems, know the things, like having somebody stand on stage at lecture them is not helpful. What they do need is community. So we've talked about like, you know, what we really need to do is like have everybody come to San Diego for vacation and all hang out together and have the release of being able to like have margaritas and tacos and talk about how you're feeling about work in between
Hmm.
sort of swimming in the ocean and surfing and doing the other things that San Diego avails you. So it's more about relaxing as a community than it is about communicating information. And so I think that's an interesting, maybe my thought for the last week or so since I've, seen you recently
Hmm.
is how much of what behavioral science needs is not more discussion, it just needs more community.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Well, if you don't mind, I might share my take on it. I feel that conferences are needed for sort of people from outside of the field. So they get to learn about behavioral science as a field, the tools, the practices, case studies and all of that stuff. So they get more comfortable and familiar and understand like where to apply it, what to do with that. So that's what I feel, I don't know, missing
I,
because, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's an important outcome for sure. The question remains whether that is more easily accomplished via a behavioral science conference where we get other people to come to us, or us going out to other conferences and giving the behavioral science talk. So, for example, in Chicago,
Hmm.
I was speaking at a Medicare Advantage experience, sort of more of a CXy type of conference
Okay.
where I was doing the behavioral science talk. I think both are valuable. The thing that I will say about having a behavioral science conference where we bring in outsiders is sometimes that can reinforce behavioral science as sort of a novelty rather than an integrated thing, right?
Mm.
And often the people that you would get to come to that are the BSci enthusiasts, right? Who also have trouble selling it into their organizations, right? As opposed to, when you go to a CX conference and talk about behavioral science, you are converting CX people to be excited about behavioral science. So there's a difference between the step that is, how do I get people who are not excited about behavioral science to be excited about behavioral science? And then how do I take people who are excited about behavioral science and help them advance? And what I was
Hmm.
arguing is mostly for these people who are interested in behavioral science but need to advance, what they actually need is passive exposure to behavioral scientists more than they need a lecture from someone on stage. But you could be right. Maybe they need more of this. It's interesting, if you look at the European conferences, nudge stock is much more internal, right? Meaning the majority of the people who go are behavioral scientists, and we're sort of behavioral scientists talking to other behavioral scientists. Whereas if you look at something like, what's the French one that's put on by, I've spoken at it twice and I can't even remember the name. If I don't think about it for a second, audience members, this is because I don't sleep. Leave me alone. If I don't think about it, I'll remember. That is much more like French CEOs coming to learn about behavioral science than it is about behavioral scientists speaking to other behavioral scientists. So there is an element of both, I think.
Yeah.
Sort of internal to the community discussions and, bringing people to the thing. But
yeah, I feel also like the mix is very important. So people in the field also meet up to just share knowledge and, again, case studies, best practices, what they learned, etc. This is also what I'm trying right now to do in South Africa. I already got in touch with, I don't know, 10 or 15 people, and we're putting something together in October. But mostly because I believe the more people in the field share what they do, the faster the field grows itself. It's like, I remember reading about or listening about COVID, and when all the scientific community decided to share the knowledge openly so they could develop the solutions much faster, and the things did move much faster because of that. So I'm thinking, like, in any field, that is actually true. The more you communicate in the field and the more you allow the flow of ideas, information, and, again, case studies, etc., like, the faster just the field develops and brings more value to the outside world.
yes, but that's, I think, the part where maybe we have a lot of things to learn from each other within behavioral science, but that's not as clear to me. It's not as clear to me. If I think about, look, we need both, but if we're forced to compete between behavioral scientists talking to other behavioral scientists and behavioral scientists talking to the outside world, it feels to me like the dominant problem for the outside world is informational, and the dominant problem internally is motivational. It's hard to be a behavioral scientist, and I think a lot of people are pretty beat down. I did remember, I looked it up while we're over here. BVA. BVA is the...
Okay. Yes, that's what you talked about with Scott Young, who is also going to be on our podcast. So, listeners, stay
Well, there you
tuned.
go. See?
I'm
Making
talking to
it
him
happen.
right after you.
Scott's great. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think you're broadly right. Look, and I think there's room for... The biggest problem to running an applied behavioral science conference is conferences. This is a misapprehension that most people have. Conferences are not funded by your ticket sales. They are mostly funded by your sponsorship.
Yeah.
Right. And there's not a hell of a lot of people that are trying to sell into the behavioral science community. And that in and of itself remains a bit of a problem. Right. The very fact that, like, we're not an attractive audience to market to, like, who's going to sell to us? Right. SaaS or like some sort of statistics package. Right. Like, I don't know who would sponsor a behavioral science conference other than one of the behavioral science agencies who is just trying to drum up more client work.
Good question. I haven't thought about that fact of organizing conferences. But yeah, just
this is why we like the idea of a San Diego hangout, because then everybody bears there's no collective cost. Everybody can come to my house for dinner and drinks. I'll happily bear the cost of that. And then everybody else bears their own cost because it's basically a vacation. There's no conference room that needs booking. There's no whatever, right, that requires, sponsorship to offset ticket prices and paid speakers and flying speakers in and all that kind of stuff, right? So
yeah, well, we'll see. Maybe we'll run some experiments and figure out what's
testing.
the best way.
We're gonna find out what happens.
Yes, exactly. So before we jump into the rest of our conversation, just wanted to again remind our listeners to check back our first episode that's going to be linked in the show notes and to learn more about your work in behavioral science world in general. And the purpose of today's conversation is something that you told me you were passionate about, excited about, or wanting to work more in, which is internal change in the organization's culture, experience, I guess, employee experience, right? And figuring out how to apply all the good stuff that behavioral science has, all the toolkits and strategies to change, how our employees or how we all experience our work. So we deliver better work, have better lives, and I don't know, create a lot more positive impact. And I'm also very passionate about that. And that's why I wanted to invite you back in and to talk more about it. And so let's jump in to this conversation. And if you don't mind, I have a ChatGPT question that I loved
Okay.
to start the
What does the
conversation.
AI want to know from me today?
Yes, it just like such a fun framing of the question. Company that I wanted to ask, companies obsess over shaping customer behavior, but neglect their own employees. Why is internal behavior design still the red-hatted stepchild of applied behavioral science?
So it's a reasonable question. I mean, look, there's a dollar and cents version of this, which is, you know, customers are revenue. And so it's very easy to attach behavior change directly to revenue things, right? Hey, if I sell more of this, or I subscribe more of this, or I prevent this churn, it's all money coming in the door, right? Employees are just a cost, right? And so most of the metrics that you would think about be changing from a behavioral perspective are not valued in the same way that revenue is valued in a company, right? As a
Hmm.
great example, when a company reports their Wall Street earnings, they don't typically talk about employee attrition, right? What is our employee
Yeah.
attrition rate is not something that comes up on an earnings call. Even though it's tremendously important, it's not something we view as a key business metric. And so when we don't look at things like that as key business metrics, they remain underfunded, underlooked at, et cetera. I also think people view consumers as more easily swayed than employees, meaning
Hmm.
if Matt is, I just accept that I have a 10% attrition rate, people will always leave. It doesn't really matter what I do. And so there's no point in investing in behavior change. We could take a different example. People are about as inclusive as they're ever going to be. Angela is much more inclusive than Matt is, and it's tremendously hard to get Matt to be more inclusive than he natively is, right? Whereas you would never say that on the consumer side. You would never say, oh, I give up on Matt as a consumer because it's too hard to change his behavior. Like, I'm going to change everybody's behavior all the time. I'm going to get every consumer that I can get. I'm going to fight for every dollar. And so this notion that like people in their workplace mindsets are a lot more fixed and therefore their behavior cannot change and therefore it's not worth investing in causes people to be not as focused on internal behavior change.
Hmm.
I also think it depends on the market. So when in markets where you look at something like COVID, where talent was scarce and you were really competing for talent, then internal behavior change became a lot more important because it was all about getting people to accept offers and stay and not a treat and work from home in a productive way and whatever. In a market like today, where there's not a lot of jobs out there. There's a lot of people looking, right? There's been layoffs. There's been other things. There's a lot of financial uncertainty in the face of AI and Trump's economic policies. Suddenly the balance shifts and all of those internal behaviors just aren't as important as they once were. And so
Hmm.
I would say it's about differential promoting pressure. Hey, this is not
Hmm.
revenue generating. And then it's differential inhibiting pressure. Employees are hard to change. Other people are not.
Yes, well, you said that it's not revenue generating, which for me is kind of weird to hear because employees are the ones who do all the work. Like without that work, you don't generate any revenue ever, right? So
It's true, but often it depends on the style of business how closely you can attribute revenue generation and employees. And what I will say is when you look at internal behavioral science, it's more often applied in the places where those connections are stronger, meaning sales teams. The number
Mm-hmm.
one internal behavioral science request I get is how do I make my sellers better sellers, right? Because I can track the revenue. I can say Matt went from $500 a month to $1,000 a month in MRR generated, like blah, 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 blah. I can sort of attribute those things. How much revenue do we make by making a customer service person not a treat? Who knows, right? We can sort of hand wave at like, well, it costs this much to hire and retrain somebody to replace them, but it's a little harder. But that's not the same as like, here's the revenue that comes from this customer service person being experienced, knowing what they're doing, etc.
Yeah. Don't you think it's a little bit superficial, like in a sense, when I deal with any company and their customer service sucks, I'm probably going to leave that company very soon, especially if I need to deal with that on some regular basis. And so, yeah, maybe the connection is not that direct, but it will cause like a lot of
I mean,
companies to lose customers.
I don't, what I'll say is you can label it superficial. That doesn't make it less true,
Yeah.
right? Rather than being judgy about whether it's superficial or not, what I would say is the connection between behavior and money
Yeah.
is either closer or farther away. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
look at the industries, even if we talk about external behavioral science, if you look at the industries where it's most often used, health and finance, they are the places where we have the easiest time directly saying this behavior results in this money. If people get
Mm-hmm.
this flu shot, they like
Mm-hmm.
save us this money, right? Or like we get bonus payments from the government. If people take loans at these rates, I can very precisely model how much money I make on top of it. And
Mm-hmm.
the industries where it's least adopted are the ones where it's the farthest away, right? Where it
Mm-hmm.
isn't clear how behavior directly leads to revenue, right? In the most direct way. You can look at things like, and these are examples where there are behavioral science in play. If you look at Spotify and Netflix, how much does the incremental movie watching keep me subscribed is a little bit of a tenuous connection. Now, both those two companies have done a very good job of modeling what that connection is. Hey, how often does Matt have to engage with the service in order for him to stay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's always back to customer churn. It's always back to me staying on the platform and keeping the thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to precisely model behavior money connections pretty much mediates how much people are willing to invest in applied behavioral science. And unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
internally, that's harder math. I'm
Okay.
not saying
But
it's not superficial.
yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with the fact that customer service people are important. I'm just saying it's harder to model that, and we're cognitive misers. And so it's much easier to say, well, if I sell an incremental whatever.
When taking these challenges, what makes you interested in the field and in this issue in general, like changing culture internally and applying behavioral science there? And how do you also see maybe overcoming some of these challenges?
Well, I
Which,
think, when you talk about applied behavioral scientists, we're a pretty meaning oriented bunch, right? Like, we like doing things that are impactful. And I think that investing in people's work happiness is a huge part of investing in their individual happiness, in how they approach
Mhm.
the world, in how they feel in terms of helping them get to a place that feels good for them. And so my interest is less about because it drives profitability and more in the like it enriches people's lives, and that is the job of applied behavioral science, is to enrich people's lives. Now, I
Mhm.
happen to work somewhere, and I try and choose places like this fairly deliberately, where there is a greater economic incentive to improve work life. So at Oceans, right, we are,
Mhm.
we hire Angela and then we help place her in another company, and then we help her grow and feel supported as she works as part of that embedded team, right? That's part of how we do global talent. So that Angela chooses to stay at the company and continues to grow and doesn't leave is a great predictor of clients staying with us, right? Because if Angela
Mhm.
leaves, there's a pretty good chance that client leaves because they were bonded to her, and we don't know if we're going to be able to get her bonded to somebody else. So we want divers that are growing and happy in their placements. So we have a very, more than many businesses, have a much easier time having a direct economic incentive to work on things like growth and work life and other kinds of pieces. That's very different than other people in our space, right? If you look at the sort of BPO outsourcing space, if they're an outsourced call center, they say, cool, like our average attrition rate is 20%, and we just hire and train at a 20% replacement rate. We don't really try and stop people from leaving. We just let them leave and then hire new ones because people are cogs to us. There's no reason to invest in, when you're commoditizing people, there's no reason to invest in them as individuals, to invest in their work life, because you can swap them out with new people that you buy from the market, easily. So I think working in companies where the revenue is attached to work life makes it easier to invest in work life.
Yes, I mean, that makes sense. But also, what I'm kind of thinking about is, for me, internal change also has a lot to do with things like innovation. Let's say you have a culture where predominantly you have fixed mindset, you have a culture where predominantly you have growth mindset, right? One is more pro innovation, the other is more pro how things are in status quo. And so we do have really great case studies in the wild, so to speak, showing that when you change that aspect, then business can explode. Like in the sense of Microsoft, for example, they reinvented the culture from inside out, and that's how they were able to solve their business problem from not being innovative enough and being behind, not generating revenue, etc. Right? So I guess my question is, why do you think more companies don't see it that way?
Well, but let's take Microsoft as an example, right? Yes, they converted to a more innovation-focused culture as they changed CEOs. I lived through this. So, I came in with Ballmer and left with Satya. So I lived through the CEO transition. Yes, there was a definite change in culture there, but they also were under tremendous market pressure to reverse, right? It's still economically motivated, right? And so companies that are, in air quotes, doing well are not under pressure to ramp up innovation and are not under pressure to make those culture changes that they need to make. I also think this feeds back into my original point, which is, sure, you're right, innovation drives revenue, but it's still about revenue, right? At the end of the day, if you can't connect the behavior change to revenue, and innovation has always been a hard one, because when you approach it as a behavioral scientist, what do you mean when you say innovative? What is the physical, literal behavior that you want people to do? Suggest more ideas? Work longer hours? Like, what is the behavior of innovation? And that becomes a tremendously hard one to define, right? I want a culture that is more innovative is one of the toughest statements to then say, okay, well, what does innovation mean to you? And to really dig in on. So I agree with you that things like applied behavioral science can help with the behaviors of innovation, but I think that requires market pressure and a tie to revenue, right? Innovation alone doesn't count. It's only innovation that pays me money.
Yeah, based on data, it says that if the company is more innovative, then it does, over the course of long term, brings more revenue, or at least has the chance to stay relevant in the current market environment. Whatever that is.
But not in the same way that, like, I can run a model that says an attrition rate of this, an attrition rate of divers at Oceans means a client attrition rate of this, which means a revenue attrition rate of that, right? So I can run a very direct model. You cannot run a model that says, what is even the metric of innovation? One extra innovation point gets me $2 in additional, like, what is the model, right? And so people are hesitant to, how much should I invest in innovation?
No.
I don't know. I can't run on a financial model that tells me what the return rate is. And so if you can't model the return rate, how do I know how much to invest? I know exactly how much to invest at Oceans. Okay, like, if I can get people to churn, if I can spend $100 a diver a month, and I can reduce the churn rate by, the attrition rate by this, then that means I can reduce the customer churn rate by this, which means I can retain $200 in revenue, which makes a $199 bet a pretty good bet, right? It means I make $1 of profit on a $199 bet. You can't do that with innovation, right? You wave your hands around like, yes, innovation helps. Sure, okay, great. But like, where's the model that tells me that you can post hoc say, well, because Microsoft made more money, they must have gotten more innovative, right? But it's very hard to say, like, it's like utilitarianism. The unit is a util. What is the what is the unit of innovation? An innovatal?
I agree. It's harder to measure, but it seems that companies who do dedicate resources to innovation do well over long term, and companies who don't seem not to. Well, I might be biased. Yes, maybe.
But maybe. Again, how do we even model that? Right? How do you say how do you even metric what companies are spending on innovation?
Time?
Is that R&D spend? Is that they have an innovation head and an innovation department? Like, what are we talking about when we talk about the money that somebody spends on innovation? If innovation is very deeply embedded into a culture, it's hard to extract out the innovation portion and say, well, it's 20% of our budget. 20% of our budget is innovation? What does that even mean?
Yeah, I agree that it's harder to measure like anything in culture, to be honest. And that's why probably it's also hard to apply any science to it. But maybe let's switch gears because we could be talking about that for hours. But let's talk about something that you are excited about to work on. Like when you talk about internal change, what it is you want to work on in companies, maybe what kind of companies, what problems do you want to solve? And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm deeply obsessed with these days is it is abundantly clear that meaning is a very powerful promoting pressure. It is a very clear that money is a very powerful in promoting pressure. What I think newly is emerging is that growth and the feeling of development, the feeling that I am becoming better than I was the day before, is sort of the third leg of that stool. I want to be paid well. I want to be compensated. I want to do work that is impactful in the world, and I want to feel like I'm growing. And so I'm working a lot on what causes people to feel growth and what behaviors are predictive of growth. So one of the things, for example, that we're doing at Oceans is moving to a much more detailed rubric of performance to be able to say, hey, Angela, like, here are the places where there's room for growth. Let's work on those specific places, right? Very often companies stop at a leveling system. So they say, Angela, you're a marketing level 59, to take Microsoft parlance. And, if you work really hard, you'll become a marketing level 60, right? What we don't do is say, well, what does it mean to be a 59? And what does it mean to be a 60? And where are the gaps that Angela needs to fill between 59 and 60? So what we're doing at Oceans is trying to say, in a very specific way, here are 12 characteristics that we are looking for between levels. Here are the frameworks at each level. Let's give you some really detailed feedback about like, hey, Angela, you're great over here. Where you need to work is right here, right? And those are as objective as we can make them, skill-based, behavior-based. And then we can go after that. I've always been fascinated by the Boy Scouts. So I'm an Eagle Scout. And the way advancement in the Boy Scouts works is you only advanced ranks when you are able to demonstrate all of the behaviors associated with the next rank. So what happens is, let's say you're a tenderfoot and you're going to become a first class or a second class or whatever. Here's a list of skills. You have to be able to show that you can do CPR. You have to be able to show that you can do a fireman's carry. You have to be able to start a fire with a flint and steel, whatever, right? So what happens is, one at a time, you demonstrate those skills over time, right? This den meeting, we're going to work on fire starting. That den meeting, we're going to work on fireman's carries, right? Then, once you've checked all those off, an adult has said, yep, I watched Angela light a fire, and I watched Angela do a fireman's carry, and I watched Angela do CPR. Then you come before a council, and they randomly select. So they say, hey, of these 30 skills, Angela, demonstrate this one live, demonstrate that one live, demonstrate this one live, demonstrate that one live. And you either pass or don't pass. And if you don't pass, then you have to wait a month, and then you can try again. That's really interesting to me because it's so different from how we typically look at performance at work, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't sort of say, like, here are the capabilities I expect to see at the various levels. And so a lot of performance at work becomes tied to opportunity, right? It's not what Angela is capable of doing, it's whether she's in a position to be able to exercise those capabilities to affect the company's outcomes. But the problem is, Angela doesn't have a say in that, right? You, Angela, don't get to decide the opportunities that are presented to you. You have to angle for those politically, etc. That makes
Mm-hmm.
it my responsibility. So weirdly, I am accountable and responsible for your advancement. We don't want that. What we want to say is, regardless of the opportunities available to you that we have been able to provide, what are you capable of doing that allows us to do this place? Does that make sense?
Sort of. I'm still wrapping my head around that. And so, can you explain maybe shorter or side by side, like how they do it in Boy Scouts and how they do it in workplace?
Well, typically in workplace-based things, we say, all right, Angela, it's your year-end review. Tell me what you accomplished, right? Tell me what value you brought to the business,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that is largely a factor of the opportunities that were available to you,
Yes.
right? What projects you were assigned to, et cetera. And so the internal behavior that creates is competition for opportunity. So
Mm-hmm.
Matt and Angela are going to duke it out to see who can be on this project that is probably going to have differential returns. And whoever
Mm-hmm.
wins that fight politically and gets
Mm-hmm.
assigned to the project is the person who's going to get a promotion because they got assigned to a really good opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's very different than saying, hey, it is our job to provide you with opportunities. It is your job to be capable of executing on those. And so what I'm going to measure is not the value you create, but rather your capability for creating value, right? Regardless of what I assign you to. So that way, Matt and Angela don't have to compete with each other to get on the special project. What they need to do is compete with themselves to be ever more capable. And then the business gets realigned around, how do I create as many opportunities as possible, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
if you look at Oceans, rather than saying, well, you got with a good client and you got with a less good client, and so you're going to get a promotion because your client is a better client. Instead, we can say, in an alternative universe, you would have done really well at this good client. You didn't happen to get this more powerful client. That's okay. That's not on you. That's on us. We're the ones who decided where you went. And so we shouldn't hold you responsible for that. We should take
Mm-hmm.
responsibility for that and instead measure your expressed ability. And so looking at, like, how do we create growth? How do we measure on growth? How do we promote on growth rather than
Mm-hmm.
how do we promote on value creation, which is really our responsibility as a business. It's my job to create opportunities that create value. It's your job to be able to execute on those when I create them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds logical and good. I guess I would ask, but opportunities are always limited. So even if you create capability, like not everyone would be able to exercise this capability, I guess.
But that's our job as a business. That's not your responsibility as an employee. That's my job as a business, is to create as much opportunity as possible, right? And so I should pay according to your capability and promote
Okay.
according to your capability, not to whether or not I did a good job of creating opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a sales department needs to create as much opportunity as we possibly can. We then need to assign that to divers, but it's not really the divers' fault if they don't get a really great opportunity, because that's on us. That's not on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to do is hold people accountable for the thing that they are responsible for, right? Rather than the thing that we are responsible for.
Yes. I love the idea that you're talking about motivation here, like in general, people's motivation and the sort of pillars which are so well aligned with self-determination theory, right? Well, money is sort of like Maslow before all of that, before relatedness, mastery, and the relatedness, mastery, and what purpose? No, that's what do we have? Three self-determination theory. I'm blinking here. Purpose, mastery. Do you remember which one the third one?
I know that's what Google's for.
Uh, no. But anyhow, so mastery, yes, it is one of the core motivators for a human being. If we are not growing, we don't feel comfortable. We feel unfulfilled. Then we want to switch jobs and we want to, I don't know, do something else, right? And the problem, as you mentioned, at the workplace very often, like in order to grow, you have to like go through this politics and have to, I don't know, compete on the things that you don't want to be developing, like figuring out how to talk better to, I don't know, certain people to get those opportunities. So that's one of the aspects of internal culture that you're trying to change. You're passionate to changing, creating, I guess, equal opportunity to exercise this need of people to grow
Well,
and get better.
or I want to decouple opportunity from growth, right? If
Mm,
that makes sense. Meaning,
hmm
I can't guarantee a plethora of equal opportunities. In fact, I know inherently there will be some projects that are better than other projects. I know that there'll be some clients that are better than other clients. Whatever business you're in, there will be more growthy areas, more shiny object areas than others. And instead, what we want to say is our understanding of people is not based on the opportunities that are presented to them, but rather their capability. If in a perfect world we had been able to give them an opportunity, would they have been
hmm
able to execute on it? And how do we measure that? Right?
Yes.
Because it's our job to provide those opportunities. And then hopefully we get to a place where if you measure capability in that way, hopefully more you can create more opportunity because you're confident in your workforce's ability to activate on that opportunity.
hmm
I can take bigger and so you talked earlier about innovation. I can take bigger and riskier bets if I know that if I know that my company can rise to the occasion, right? And so if I know the true capability level of my employees, I can take bigger and riskier bets because I know I have the employees to fulfill those bets.
Yeah. And what I'm also, hearing about what you're saying is don't try to somewhat fix people or figure out, I don't know, how to make them more engaged, but fix the system. So you create the conditions where people, for example, feel more engaged because they have opportunity to grow and develop is one of the things. Uh, so growth, is there any other aspect of culture that you are passionate about changing
I mean, I'm
and
always passionate about every part of a culture. It's just what I happen to be obsessed with today is growth, right?
yes.
Once you get to a place where you solve is the wrong answer. Something can always be better, but
hmm
if you think about it again from this economic priority issue, what you want to do is get someplace to you want to get something to a place of diminishing marginal return. Meaning you want to
hmm
get to someplace where investing more in lowering attrition. So our attrition rate at Ocean's about 3%. Getting it from 3 to 2, so and in contrast, the average is about 10 to 15. So
Yeah,
way
super
below
low.
the average. Getting it from 3 to 2 is going to be really hard and going to cost a lot of money and time. So thinking about other business imperatives, becomes more profitable to think about something else at some point. And then you come back to this, right? As, as you eliminate other economic opportunities by improving those. So I think that one of the things that is inevitable is it can't just be what are you passionate about. It has to be, well, what does your business need from you today? Where is the greatest
hmm
economic opportunity for change? Right?
hmm
Because the sure way to kill an applied behavioral science unit is to chase only your interests, right? And not the interests of the business.
Yeah,
Because you're
because
funding it
business,
based on your ability to deliver value.
yeah, it's business world. Like in my view as well, like whatever you do in business, it has to be tied to business impact. It has to bring profit, revenue. It's like otherwise the business will not survive, and then what's all for? So 100%, it's also like looking for that leverage, like where does it make sense to do more? And in terms of people development as well, there is, you can try to make something perfect, or you can work on something which will, with a little bit of investment, bring you a lot more return, even though you're not going to be maybe perfect there. So yeah, totally makes sense. And I feel like growth and development of people is one of those big problems that are becoming more and more relevant in a sense that, our tools start to learn faster than than we can, and AI specifically. And we need people who know how to learn, who know how to grow, have the opportunity to develop themselves and upskill themselves and find the opportunity to go to their next level. I feel like that is very important. And plus, it's one of the core motivators for a human being.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that last part is really important, right? Often we view this as a promoting pressure problem when in reality it's an inhibiting pressure problem. People that want to be innovative, they're lazy, they're not thoughtful, blah, blah, blah. No, it's mostly that your organization makes it incredibly hard for them to do the thing that they
oh,
see as innovative, impactful, et cetera. And so
yeah.
there's this very basic problem where people have this tendency to sort of assume a promoting pressure problem when in fact it's an inhibiting pressure problem to most of those things. People don't want to grow. No, everybody on earth wants to grow. It is an intrinsic human desire that everybody on earth, unless they're sort of a psychopath or sociopath, like everybody wants to grow. The question is just how easy do you make it for people to do that? And so doing things like, hey, Angela, here are 12 characteristics of growth. Here's some really careful evaluation of which one of those to work on. And by the way, I'm going to help you work on those.
Hmm.
That's not about making growth more attractive. I don't have to convince anybody that growth is a thing they should want. I just have to make it slightly easier to do the thing that is growth, right? And that's
Yes.
the place where focusing on inhibiting pressures really makes a difference.
It's also that there is a book, The Progress Principle. I don't know if you read this, but
I only read
really,
fiction, so the answer is no.
yes, but amazing book. Teresa Amabile, I think that's her name is. Well, they did the study with uh they made people like in a few companies to do work-life diaries where they registered their satisfaction with work, trying to figure out what makes people's work life like the happiest, so to speak. And they did 12,000 to work diaries. They have like a lot of data. And what they learned is that progress is what motivates people the most and makes them the happiest. And then, so basically growing, making progress on meaningful work. And what they also learned, they call them the catalysts in the book, is that the easier, for example, you make the opportunity to make progress for people, the more like this work life satisfaction goes up, right? And it speaks to what you said. It's people already want to make progress. It just sometimes it's so damn hard at the workplace, whether you don't get resources, you don't get help, you like funding, whatever that is, then people just give up, stay unsatisfied until they leave completely.
And I think one of the things that happens here is managers hear that from people like you and I, and what they do is lower the bar. And that's not what we mean, right? Making it easier to grow is not the same thing as lowering the bar for what growth means. I still have
Hmm.
very high expectations. At Oceans, we have extraordinarily high expectations of our divers, and we are pushing them very, very hard to get better, right? And but we're supporting them in that growth. So I think sometimes people hear we got to make it easier, and it becomes the participation trophy of childhood, right? Like, oh, I just need to reward people. I just need to give people that constant serotonin boost, right? I just need to push down, push down, push down the standard. That's not what we mean when Angela, when you and I say make it easier, we don't mean lower the standard. What we mean is provide the support, right?
Yeah.
Hey, how do you measure growth, right? Hey, here's a characteristic on which you have an opportunity to grow. How do you measure that? How do we support you in doing that? Those make it easier to grow without lowering the standard of growth that I'm holding for you, right? And so I think getting managers to look at the system not as, well, how do I give the illusion of growth? How do I give the constant, gold star participation trophy gamification version of growth, but
Hmm.
instead in a real and meaningful way say, hey, here is where you have an opportunity to become better, and I'm going to support you in that betterness. That's where I think there's opportunity.
And so would you say, do you have a like system already for that in place, like step-by-step solution that you could take companies through, or are you still working on that?
No, no, because I think every company is unique. I mean, I think the easy and most basic thing is, I mean, there's a fun trick that I like to do, which is if you just walked around and asked people, what is the one thing you need to improve at, right?
Mm-hmm.
How concrete of a behavior can they give you, right? So one of the things we have at Oceans is a documented growth goal. So if
Mm-hmm.
Angela is a MOS 2, right, a marketing operations specialist 2, she says, I want to grow vertically. I want to become a MOS 3. Horizontally, I want to become a business operations 2. So I want to change into a different role.
Mm-hmm.
I want to move into a different function entirely. So like, hey, I want to join the internal team, for example. I want to join the HR team, et cetera. Or I have some external goal. I want to become an entrepreneur. I want to join this particular company. I want to go work for the government, whatever. And everyone has a documented growth goal that they are working on, and
Mm-hmm.
that they have a documented growth plan. So they could, so if
Mm-hmm.
you ask somebody at Oceans, hey, Angela, like, where are you going and how are you getting there? They'll tell you, I'm going from MOS 2 to MOS 3, and what I need to work on is this, and the plan that I have to do that is this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really easy place to start. Is literally just start asking people, where are you going and how are you getting there from a growth perspective, and see what they say, right? And if they don't know, that's a cultural problem. That's a systems problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? How are you systemically creating an environment in which people are very explicit about where they're going, that's public to other people so that they can provide opportunities for them and work on that,
Mm-hmm.
and going from there.
And do you have any, again, advice maybe on how to start structuring that kind of system where everyone knows where, how they grow, and
I just write it
what's the
down.
next
I
step?
mean, it depends on the size of company that you are. But look, if you
Mm-hmm.
are a 10-person startup, you can just make a spreadsheet and say, am I moving up,
Mm-hmm.
sideways, in or out? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then here's how I'm planning to get there. Here's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. And I feel also like we are so lucky to have also AI tools, and there are so many learning systems which are also powered by AI that they're probably a solution that can help.
I mean, there are tons of more advanced solutions than that, but do the stupid easy thing before you do the more complicated thing. And the stupid easy thing is write it the fuck down in a place that
Mm-hmm.
everybody can see it, right? We can get more complicated with AI coaches and growth, but we can do all this stuff, right? But start with the dumbest possible, easiest possible thing, which is just everybody write down where you want to go and how you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
there in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, in a place that we all can see, right? Then we can talk about how to add more time, more layer, more expense on top of that. Sure, right? But people aren't even doing the basic, is what I find, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
find the majority of companies you go into cannot say with any degree of specificity, here is where people want to go, and here is how they're getting there, and here is how I'm going to help them. And people
Mm-hmm.
can't do it for themselves. Managers can't do it for their employees or the people they manage, and teammates can't do it for other teammates. And
Yeah. And
that's the problem. And it has to go in that order. You have to figure it out for you, Angela. Then you have to figure out how to communicate it to me, your manager, and then jointly we need to figure out how to communicate that to everybody else in the company.
and why do you think a lot of companies don't have this figured out? Is it simple, the lack of understanding of importance of that? I don't know, awareness not urgent enough?
Yeah, I don't think that, most people don't create the time. I think some people feel like it's breaking into jail, meaning they worry that having somebody write down their desire for growth will make them dissatisfied with their job if they're not growing, right? And this is a very classic one, right? It's like inclusion. People don't want to run an inclusion program because they are afraid of what they'll hear or see, right? And so, they don't look at things like how are women treated in our workplace because the cost, the economic cost, the risk, et cetera, of finding out that women are not treating equally means you have to do something about it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times people don't lean into growth because they think growth will mean that people will leave the company. And what I would say
Mm-hmm.
is, if you're unwilling to look at that, you already have the problem, right?
Oh.
If you're unwilling to grapple with the fact that somebody might need to leave your company to grow, then people are already leaving your company to grow, and you're already experiencing the most negative outcome that you can possibly experience from that. And so you might as well be looking at it.
Yes, I so agree. Having the experience of being an executive coach, helping very often leaders to figure out their next step. Like once they figure out where they want to go, if the company doesn't provide that, like there is nothing stopping them from leaving that company. It literally like once that desire to change, to grow crystallizes, like there is nothing stopping that. It's that dissatisfaction actually gonna something at some point gonna happen sooner than later, right? And if there is a system that which will help to identify that dissatisfaction and have the conversation, have some sort of intervention sooner than later, then company has a lot more chance to retain top talent into their leadership.
And if you've waited for it to become dissatisfaction, it's too late, right? Like, you need to assume that everybody wants to be growing and be working on that before they become dissatisfied with their growth, right? The worst position is to ignore it. But the second worst position is to only wait until it's a problem, right? We need to acknowledge that everybody wants to grow, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely everybody. You, me, everybody else. And so if you don't have some sort of thing lined up to acknowledge and celebrate and work on a thing you know to be a core human motivator, well,
Yeah.
you're already behind the ball. Let's go, right? Don't wait.
Yeah. I think it just so many leaders still did not catch up with this self-determination theory, understanding what people need at the core, right?
Look, folks, people need to be more economically rewarded over time because of the hedonic treadmill. People need to have
Yeah.
direct connection to the meaning of their work, and they need to feel like they're growing. There you go. And if you don't have a
And yeah,
program addressing each of those three things, you got to go.
the third one I remembered, autonomy, ability to make choices and exercise your
So
your
I think autonomy is really important. I think autonomy only comes with accountability, right? You have to know how to measure people's, are you doing, you have to be clear on here's the things I expect out of you. So to me, is related to growth. We could call it a separate thing, but you can't, what I would say is, I would argue it's tough to grow without autonomy. So
yeah.
autonomy is an ingredient that allows for the outcome that is growth, right? Or honors the motivator that is growth. But I
I guess
agree.
where I see it a little bit different is that, let's say somebody says, okay, well, my people have a clear path of progression. I don't know from where they are at, where they supposed to be wanting to go according to the definition of their like professional skill, their skill set. But what if I'm like here and I want to jump there, right? So for me, autonomy and being able to do that, that is the where
Well,
it's
remember the way that I defined growth, right? I didn't tell you
yeah,
where you want
you
to
said
go.
that. Yeah, but what I'm saying is in a lot of companies, it's like that. You have this sort of ladder, whereas, yeah, you said, it can be horizontal, it can be vertical, and
Yes, and Angela has to have the right to choose that. Right is a weird word in that in the sentence, but like has to have the ability to make that choice for herself.
yes. So we don't have a lot of time, and we again could be speaking about that forever. But I do want to ask you, because it is something that you're working on, you're developing. Let's say, I don't know, we are speaking a year or 2 or 3 years, and you made considerable impact in that helping companies to create better system and for growth internally. Like how would it look like? I guess what's your impact for the next, I don't know, several years?
I
What's
mean, I
the
think,
ideal future?
yeah, I mean, think if you look at an ideal future, the only people who would need to move companies are the people for whom that was an explicit goal, right? Meaning, if we look back at the sort of like in, out, up, sideways, only the people who already had an out goal would be leaving a company, right? So I think attrition zero is not the goal that we're shooting for,
Hmm.
right? It's not attrition zero. It's zero attrition among ins, ups, and sidewayses, right? The outs,
Okay.
I don't think we should be keeping people in companies if their desire is to go start something themselves. I think that's a great goal and we should be comfortable with it and we should be able to accept it. So in a world where this is working really well, people are staying in companies because they're feeling like they're growing,
Hmm.
unless their explicit growth goal is going out.
Yes, it's not like sometimes people say, well, it used to be that people stayed in their job for like 10 years, the whole life, and now people switching jobs like this. And maybe the reason is because there is no sufficient or adequate way desirable way for people to grow inside of the company. Either there is, again, no like path the way that they want to see it, or something else, there are not enough opportunities, etc., whatever the reason, right? And maybe just the company's structure and processes have to somehow be more flexible, allowing people to grow as they'd like. And so they stay longer. And maybe we can have the future where people stay again with their organization for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, growing sideways and vertically and in all
And
the possible
I think that's
ways.
proportionate to the size of a company, meaning the smaller the company, the greater the likelihood that I will not be able to find the growth that I want within that company.
Mm.
Right. And so I think being reasonable about the fact that, like, hey, people leaving is okay. One of the things that we always, so I do exit everybody who leaves Oceans, no matter why they leave, I do the exit interview. And I sit down with them for half an hour and we just look for everything that we could do to improve our processes at Oceans. It's a really valuable experience for me and it's valuable for them. But one of the things I always tell them is, so there are three ways to leave the company: resignation, termination for performance, and then what we call gross negligence, meaning you lied, you cheated, you stole, you did something incompatible with our values.
Mm-hmm.
The last category, you are not eligible to reapply, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do something bad, you're gone forever, right? You need to go somewhere else. But for the first two, even if a performance termination, we say you're always welcome to reapply. So
Mm-hmm.
go work on the thing. We're not going to pay you to sit around and work on this thing. You go work on the problem that you have, but once you fix that problem, you're welcome to come back. And as long as you meet our standards, we'll let you back in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, there might be lots. So ideally what you want in a small company is, hey, Angela, in order for you to get the necessary growth that you want, you might need to leave. But once you have it, please come back, right? So when we are the right option for you, we want you to choose us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not interested in you choosing us when we're not the right option for you, but when we are the right option for you, we hope you decide to come back.
Yeah, that's I like that. Keeping the door open. Life life
Well, and I
changes
think that
often.
solves the small company problem, right?
Yeah.
It's okay for people to leave as long as they come back.
Yeah, maybe the
Boomerangs are
company
great.
grows. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, they are. To sort of conclude our conversation, is there anything else? Well,
Oh, this
good
is lovely.
question. Yes. Was there a question that you wish I'd ask, but I didn't?
No,
Something that you'd
I
like to
think
express? No,
this was
but I'm
awesome.
asking to add value to this conversation. So there is anything that you feel is valuable, but we didn't get to talk about that. Let's talk.
I mean, that list could go on forever. I thought it was a lovely and fulsome conversation. We got to talk about a lot about growth, which is something that I care a lot about. And if there are new, 6 months from now, we do part three as I have new things I'm obsessed with and new
Yeah.
problems that I want to solve. I'm about to head to Sri Lanka to see my Oceans colleagues, and I'll stop in China on the way back to give a talk. And it's a wonderful talk because they're basically doing a best of. So they've been doing this conference for 10 years, and they are getting speakers from across the 10 years to come back and give updated talks about what they're
That's
obsessed
so
with
cool.
these days, which I think is really interesting. I think it's a really interesting format to say, hey, before you said this, what do you think about now? Right? Because there is that lovely contrast, and I think it emphasizes the degree to which we are learning and changing. I don't believe the same
Hmm.
things that I did 10 years ago. I don't even believe the
Yeah.
same things I believed yesterday. So anything we talked about today is subject to change. And, I think
Yeah.
it's valuable to have those conversations about how we're evolving our beliefs. And so later on down the
Yeah.
line, we'll have to do it again, and then we can talk about how we're.
Yes, I'd love that. And just speaking about that conference, what's the main sort of change that you're going to be speaking about?
So I think I haven't decided. I very rarely decide what I'm going to talk about until I'm on stage. I think what I want to talk about is, about 10 years ago, I gave a TED talk that turned out to be fairly prophetic. It was about sort of the meaning money divide and how moving from money as motivation at work to meaning at motivation at work
Hmm.
was going to have pretty profound changes for the workplace, which, as people evaluate Gen Z, has turned out to be very true, right? They are extraordinarily meaning motivated,
Yeah.
less motivated by money, and it's changed the way the workplace works. I think I want to talk about how the problem with that is there is a lot of non-meaningful work in the world. And
Yeah.
so because we are asking people to do non-meaningful work, there's a limit, just like money, just like there's a fixed budget of money, there's a fixed budget of meaning. and that's a little bit of a trap, I'm interested in talking about, I think, how
Mm,
growth might be the next frontier of that, because growth, in fact, can be unlimited, right?
yeah.
As long as we define growth as skill acquisition and not title at a company, right? There can only be so many CEOs, but as long as we define it about actually literally becoming better at things, human potential is the only uncapped budget,
Hmm.
right? And so if that's the uncapped thing, that's what we should be focused on. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the potential and opportunity for us to use the untapped and uncapped potential of growth. And I think that's what I'll end up talking about.
That's so amazing. If you have a recording, please, or have someone recording, I'd love to see that. And I can so relate, since I was a kid, I don't know, I was never motivated by money. And I think maybe sort of slowed down my growth in business arena because I'm just not motivated by finances, right? I'm all about meaning. And I feel like right now, finally, a lot of people in the companies, culture has in companies start understanding what I was talking about, right? And I actually do believe that meaning is also untapped and you can connect almost anything to something bigger. But also you're so right about the growth. And what I also, would like to add here is growth can be about profession, but it can also about being human, like being a better teammate, being a better leader for people who you get to work with, or being a better communicator. Like in so many ways, you can grow at workplace where a place where you spend pretty much majority of your waking time. And if you're not growing there, where are you going to be growing? So, yeah. Very excited for people who are going to be listening to talk. So please do share links, and also maybe some people can attend in the audience. And what else? The last but not least, what would you like to leave our listeners with, especially leaders, somebody who can influence culture in their workplace, in their company, big or small? Like, what may be the first place they can start creating that workplace where people can continuously grow?
Well, I mean, remember, we talked about how it's it has to start with you. Can you say where you're going and how you're getting there? Right? Because if you can't do that, then there's no point in creating a system for other people to be able to doing it if you're not doing it. So start by saying, where am I going? How am I
Hmm.
going to get there? And then use that as the catalyst to create better systems in the company.
Yeah, I guess start the conversation about that, maybe somewhat publicly. And can I ask you, where are you going? Where is Matt going in terms of growth?
Ugh. So my documented growth goal at Ocean, the moment, is maybe at odds with the company. Like I think that they're in a succession planning way. You always want to look at your C-suite and say, okay, well, who can step into CEO roles, who can do those other kinds of things. I think for me personally, when I look at my growth goal, I would like to be better at the thing that I'm doing now. So I would have what we call a
Mm,
vertical growth goal, meaning as a heavy operational leader, I would like to be better at the operational bit of the thing that I'm doing. And the way that I do that is, every week I have a misses meeting where we sort of talk about like, okay, where did I miss something this week and what could I have done differently to not miss it next week? And so,
hmm.
some of that is interpersonal, some of that is communication, some of that is cultural stuff. There's always a healthy mix of stuff and it changes kind of week to week because I try very hard to action it week to week. And so, stuff is if we're, if I'm missing the same thing 3 weeks in a row, that's certainly
Yeah.
indicative of me that something needs to change.
Yes. Great goal, and probably the answer is in the systems, missing or growing, and we could do another podcast probably on that one. But yeah, thank you, Matt, again for coming to Change Wired as a guest, sharing your insights in this evolving field of growth, I guess, growth mindset cultures. And I'm looking forward to what you develop in the field. Probably something amazing, very useful, and that will change a lot of people's lives and companies for the better. So thank you for doing the work. Thank you for sharing your insights, knowledge, and passion for the field. And yeah, looking forward to the next round.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me, Angela. Take care.
You too. Thank you, Matt.